Imagine opening your eyes and realizing you're still alive, because in Viking lands, that was never something you could take for granted. Winter here wasn't a season. It was a patient hunter, killing people with absolute silence. Temperatures dropped so low your breath froze into crystals inside your mouth, and if you slept just a few inches too close to the door gap, the cold wind would crush your lungs before the sun even thought about rising. Stories from villages along the fjords say that each winter, the chieftain would hang a small wooden board on the longhouse wall, marked with the names of those who never woke up in previous years. A reminder that even a moment of carelessness could cost you your life. What made winter terrifying wasn't the cold itself, but the way it attacked, quietly, without warning, slipping through every crack in the wood, every seam in the stone, waiting for the perfect moment to freeze your body past the point of getting back up. For the Vikings, getting out of bed each morning wasn't a routine. It was a victory. Surviving the night meant you'd passed another test set by winter itself, the enemy that never stopped hunting. And if that cruelty sends a chill down your spine, ask yourself whether you could survive even one night in that frozen darkness. Then leave a comment saying whether you'd face it, because this story is only just beginning. People today might look at a 60-centimeter pile of straw and think it's just a crude bed from a distant age, but to the Vikings, it was the first front line of the survival war. A straw bed wasn't meant to be soft. It was meant to keep you alive. Compress it the wrong way, and the tiny air pockets disappear, and the frozen ground beneath will drain the heat from your body faster than any wind ever could. Sleeping there meant sleeping in what was literally a shared nest with other creatures. Real mice lived inside those layers, and the faint scratching in the night wasn't just annoying, it was a warning. When mice suddenly abandoned a corner of the straw, it meant that spot had become too cold even for them to endure. And if a mouse refused to stay there, any human lying in the same place was in immediate danger. Every night, the Vikings had to fluff and lift the straw fistful by fistful to rebuild fresh pockets of air, because even one damp patch could turn the whole bed into a cold trap that silently stole your warmth until you never woke up again. In the thick darkness of the longhouse, the moment you lay down wasn't peaceful at all. It was the moment you had to trust that the straw beneath you was dry enough, warm enough, and alive enough to carry you through another night. And if you think you're brave enough to lie on that bed, try imagining waking up to the sound of straw being chewed right beside your ear. Then tell me, would you dare sleep there a second time? People often talk about Viking wool as a symbol of northern strength, but the truth is far more brutal. For the Vikings, wool wasn't clothing. It was the final boundary between life and death. A second skin forged through weeks of almost obsessive labor. Every strand kept its natural lanolin, sticky, heavy, and carrying that sharp animal smell modern people would call dirty. But to them, it was nothing less than a snowstorm-proof armor. That unpleasant smell was a necessary sacrifice, because lanolin repelled water, blocked wind, and held heat even when soaked. And here's the twist. The dirtier and smellier Viking wool was, the better it saved lives. On the coldest nights, Vikings wore up to 7 layers, not because they wanted to, but because they knew a single wet layer could let the cold pierce straight into the heart, causing what they called internal freeze, a very real phenomenon that took people down before they could cry for help. Even children were wrapped in wool so tightly they could barely bend, waddling around like little lumps of muddy fur. Yet that was the only way to preserve the fragile heat their bodies produced. The Vikings understood that no matter how strong they were, the human body was just a weak candle in the storm of winter, and wool, the humble material everyone overlooks, was the last line of defense keeping them from being erased. The biggest shock? Those smoky, greasy, foul-smelling wool garments maintained up to 80% of their insulating power even when fully soaked, a number many modern materials still fail to match. And if you think you could survive a Viking winter with a modern puffer jacket, then tell me in the comments, would you pick synthetic comfort or the lanolin-heavy wool that might actually save your life? In every Viking home, fire wasn't just for warmth or cooking. It was the heart of the entire family, a living creature they had to guard every minute as if guarding their own lives. The Pozo de Fuego sat in the center of the longhouse, nothing more than a shallow pit ringed with a few stones, yet it carried a responsibility greater than any warrior, keeping the household from freezing to death. The problem was that this heart leaked. More than 80% of its heat shot straight up into the rafters, and the only thing that truly stayed with the people below was smoke. Smoke so thick, many described it as sleeping inside a slow-burning fire, eyes stinging, skin darkened, hair and clothes carrying the smell for months. But even that suffocation wasn't as terrifying as the fire dying out. Losing the flame in the night was a death sentence. To rekindle it, someone would have to brave the pitch-black cold, cross to another house, and beg for a live ember, while the outside temperatures were cold enough to freeze the lungs in just a few breaths. No one was foolish enough to gamble with that. So every night, they buried embers under ash, guessed the wind, controlled oxygen, and prayed their fire would smolder until dawn. A ritual where one tiny mistake meant the entire household would wake up shivering on the edge of despair. The cruel irony is that the very smoke that choked them also protected the home, coating the roof timbers with a natural moisture-proof layer that helped them last for centuries. And if you've ever thought fire was something easy to control, imagine living in a house where a single careless breath could extinguish the hope of your entire family. Then tell me in the comments, would you dare sleep beside a flame that fragile? In a Viking winter, making a fire wasn't something you did because you wanted to. It was a desperate survival equation. When blizzards lasted for weeks and dry wood became a luxury only the wealthiest families could afford, Vikings were forced to burn anything that would catch flame. And anything meant exactly that. Animal bones, broken furniture, snapped tools, rotting pieces of old boats, even the wooden planks once used to bury their dead. If it could burn, it could buy them one more night alive. The smoke from these materials was so harsh it overpowered even the smell of burning wool. But what choice did they have? Freeze to death inside their own home? Ancient accounts describe families dismantling abandoned boats plank by plank, dragging the wet, heavy wood across ice fields as if carrying their last hope, then feeding each piece into the fire in a frantic attempt to hold on to a few more degrees of warmth. In some winters, they even gathered dry dung to burn, something modern people would find disgusting. But for them, it was the line between waking up in the morning or never opening their eyes again. The most terrifying part was that they never knew what would be left to burn tomorrow. Every spark was a prayer, every collapsing ember a reminder that winter wasn't just cold, it was hungry, and it devoured everything. If you were in that situation, what would you burn first? Leave a comment. Your answer says more than you think. In the memory of the North, nothing was as sacred and as terrifying as the Viking winter soup. Don't imagine a warm family meal by the fire. This was a cauldron of desperation, where anything edible, and sometimes things that shouldn't be, was thrown in without a single person daring to ask where it came from. When winter stretched longer than expected and every storage pit ran dry, the Vikings stepped into that gray territory between survival and despair, a place where stories were whispered because they were too disturbing to say aloud. In the worst famine years, they boiled tree bark, cooked shoe leather, and chewed dried sinew as hard as stone. Some families stirred clay into the pot just to trick their stomachs into feeling full. And old tales from distant Iceland speak of human bones, not out of savagery, but because inside the marrow there was still a trace of precious fat that could keep a family alive for one more night. That pot was no longer food. It became a silent ritual begging winter to show mercy. Even stranger, some regions believed that if the soup kept simmering for many nights in a row, the spirits of their ancestors would shield the household from the killing cold. So for weeks, the cauldron never cooled, and every person returning from their tasks would quietly drop in whatever they had found. A stubborn root, a scrap of dried fat, even a small stone to add minerals, half joke, half truth. Today, it's almost impossible for us to imagine standing in front of a pot without knowing whether we were eating a chance to live or a chance to die. So if you ever faced a winter like that, would you dare take a spoonful? Leave a comment. Your answer says more about modern courage than you think. In the smoke-filled longhouse, where the cold prowled through every crack in the timber, the Vikings possessed a treasure outsiders never fully understood: the bundles of herbs hanging from the rafters. Don't mistake them for simple spices or medicine. These were their secret weapons against winter and sickness, an inheritance passed down like family incantations. Each bundle carried a scent strong enough to overpower burning wool, but inside it lived the knowledge, faith, and vigilance of countless generations. What made the Viking herb system legendary was its power to turn the ordinary into salvation. A handful of angelica could rescue someone burning with fever. A pinch of thyme in the pot could mask meat that had been spoiling for 3 days. And the poor man's pepper, a wild plant growing between stones, could make a near-rotting meal taste almost good. But the peak of its power was this: those herbs extended the life of food far beyond a single winter, at a time when one bad piece of meat could leave the entire household bedridden in the cold. That brutal rhythm of life and death shaped an unwritten law. Whoever guarded the herbs well guarded the whole winter. More than once, families traded food, tools, even precious iron, just to obtain the techniques for drying, hanging, or curing leaves, so their strength would last as long as possible. So what do you think? In a world without modern medicine or antibiotics, could a handful of herbs carry you through the storm? Share your thoughts. I'd love to know whether you'd put your trust in ancient knowledge or in luck. In a Viking winter, livestock weren't animals. They were a strategic defense system, arranged exactly like a living heat-retaining army. Modern people see cows, pigs, chickens, and sheep as food sources, but to the Vikings, each species had a clear combat role in the war against the cold. One cow was the equivalent of a small furnace. Losing a cow in midwinter was no different from losing half the house's heat. Pigs acted as mobile heat generators, always finding the warmest spots and dragging their body heat wherever humans needed it. Chickens slipped into cracks and corners, plugging cold spots like tiny, unnoticed soldiers. And sheep, with their thick wool, served as thermal shields, stabilizing the temperature of the entire room. Families arranged their animals the way a commander arranges troops. Cows near the back wall so the heat would bounce toward the center, pigs in the middle, chickens by the window gaps to alert the house at any intrusion, and sheep curled beside where the children slept. That formation could determine whether a family survived the winter. Sleeping far from the cow during a heavy snowstorm was considered a form of suicide, and any household with fewer animals had its chances of surviving the season cut nearly in half. In that thick darkness, the hot breaths of the animals weren't cute. They were the sound of life itself. So what about you? If you had to face a Viking winter, who would you rather sleep beside? A cow, a pig, or a sheep? Leave a comment and tell me which strategy you'd choose. In the Viking world, a house was never just a shelter. It was a survival statement, a declaration thrown straight into the face of winter. Half-buried walls, turf roofs stacked in thick layers, and every wooden seam packed with mud-straw manure. None of these were architectural choices. They were the political strategy of existence. Whoever built better lived. Whoever got careless disappeared from the village by spring. And what set the Vikings apart was the cold, unshakable pride with which they turned materials the rest of the world saw as waste into fortresses against blizzards. From the outside, a longhouse looked small and crude, but once you stepped inside, you realized it was the work of a people who refused to bow to nature. Digging deep into the ground to borrow the stable heat of 10 to 13 degrees Celsius, angling the doorway away from the northern winds, lowering the roof to trap warm air. Every element followed a battle plan against winter, where each detail held life or death weight. Families who stuffed their wall gaps carelessly were seen as reckless, while those who mastered the craft were respected like keepers of ancient secrets. And the most show-off part? A true Viking house could stand for centuries using nothing but earth, stone, rotting wood, and livestock manure. While many modern homes can't survive a few rainy seasons, it's a reminder that strength doesn't come from materials, but from mindset. And if you lived in that era, which side do you think you'd be on? The ones building fortresses, or the ones trembling at the wind? Leave a comment. Do you think you could survive in a Viking semi-buried longhouse? In Viking lands, where winter lurked like an enemy waiting for the perfect moment to strike, survival didn't belong to the strongest. It belonged to the most observant. The Vikings had no weather forecasts, no satellites, no meteorological instruments. What they had were their eyes, their ears, and instincts sharpened across generations. And those instincts, sometimes more accurate than modern science, saved them from snowstorms powerful enough to erase an entire village in a single afternoon. The warnings didn't come from the sky, but from the living creatures around them. When the cows in the longhouse began clustering into a single tight mass, it meant a great storm was approaching. When pigs dragged straw toward their sleeping corner, brutal cold was about to strike. When chickens cried out with a strained, broken tone in the night, everyone knew to get up and check the roof. There were even times when the sky turned a faint violet, and the elders needed only one look to say, "Close the doors. Winter has changed its face." They watched the breath of the mountains, the shifts in the wind, the flight patterns of seabirds, the sharpness of morning frost. What outsiders dismissed as superstition, they understood as survival logic. And strangely enough, this primitive method rarely failed. They relied on nature not because they lacked tools, but because they knew a truth the modern world has forgotten. Nature always warns us. Humans have simply stopped listening. So if you found yourself in a Viking blizzard, would you trust the forecast on your phone or the breath of the land beneath your feet? Leave a comment. Do you think instinct could save you? And if you want to uncover more ancient survival secrets, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next journey.